mold is, it's a major problem. So 47% of American homes have a mold or moisture problem of significance,
Mhm.
and 35% of the US population is suffering from some sort of systemic inflammation. I don't know what the overlap is. I don't know if what the causal relationship is here, but I can assure you that mold isn't helping. And so who knows how much of that is directly related, the inflammatory disease is directly related to mold. But if 47% of homes have a mold or moisture problem of significance, I would imagine there's a strong relationship. So what we wanted to start thinking about is if you don't have a known problem, but you have some sort of any symptom at all, you might want to look at this. And if you do have a symptom and you're not looking at this, well, then maybe this needs to be the next thing you do look at. And then you look at it and you go, holy shit, there's also this huge opportunity for control.
Mm.
This is the leverage point
Yeah,
or the fulcrum for massive change
cool.
in our health as a nation. If you want to make America healthy again, yes, let's get our food straight. We have to eat 3 times a day, but you have to breathe 20,000 times a day. So
Yeah.
we got to get our buildings straight. If we get our buildings straight, then when we eat well, we can heal as well. But if you can't get your building straight, it doesn't matter how well you're eating. It doesn't matter how much you're working out. In fact, you're probably working out in the moldy basement. So what we have to do is start to recognize the areas of control we do have,
I
and then
had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Jason Earle last week. He blew my hair back, and he has such a wealth of knowledge and entertainment, and also the founder and owner of Got Mold. And literally, I just asked him to please share his knowledge with my group. And so I want to say thank you, Jason.
And I want to say that, as I mentioned before we hit record, that you may have gotten me on a slightly more caffeinated day the last time, and it's a Friday afternoon, so we'll see. Performances may vary, um, but it's a pleasure to revisit this because it's an area that I probably should hit record on this, even though I do a lot of podcasts. This is something that obviously needs to be more widely dispersed, and there's just so many people call us because they think that they've got mold in their body. This is the big thing. Oh,
Yes.
I got mold in my body, and the short answer is probably not, because mold, the kingdom fungi, which includes mushrooms as well as which is known as macrofungi, and microfungi, which is molds and yeasts. Um, Yeasts will grow inside your body. They're anaerobic and aerobic. They require oxygen in some cases, and in some cases they can kind of play both sides. They're really flexible. Molds are not. They actually are what they call obligate aerobes. They require oxygen. So environmental molds, the stuff that grows in your house, likes the same stuff you do. It likes air, specifically oxygen, and it also likes warmth and food and all that stuff. And so and we give it all those things in the right temperature. So it likes to hang out right around us, which is part of the reason why, on an evolutionary basis, we've been in parallel paths. Actually, I would say we've been in sync throughout the eons until we decided to close up our buildings really tight and build them out of mold food. And then we're like, wow, what's wrong? What's wrong with the mold? Well, it's not the mold. It's it's the humans that did this. The mold isn't bothering anybody intentionally. It's just doing this thing. It's trying to turn everything that's dead back to dirt. It turns dead plant matter back to dirt, and when it's doing it in your yard, it's doing its job, right? Leaves and twigs and all that stuff. When it's doing it in your living room, not so much. And so that's the problem. But we set the stage. We build these buildings out of paper mache, and that in fact, the most interesting thing is that, and I'll get back to the building mold in the body, but the most interesting thing about our sheetrock, which is what like 75% of American homes are sheet are sheathed with on the interior. Um, According to Birgitte Andersen at Aalborg University in Denmark, she couldn't believe that she couldn't understand why there was so much toxic mold in buildings. Why was this one mold, Stachybotrys, showing up in almost every major chronic water damage issue when it's actually really not that abundant outside? I mean, it
Right.
exists everywhere. There's not really a place where you have dead grass in North America that you won't find Stachybotrys if it's moist. But it's just not abundant in the air. So why is it in all the sheetrock? And so she went and did the work, and she isolated, all the different brands of sheetrock and cleaned them, and then put them through autoclaves, et cetera, essentially sanitizing them, and then the surfaces, and then went and propagated mold on all of them. And they all had Stachybotrys and Cotomium, and it turns out they come pre-inoculated. All mold spores are already in the paper, and so we build self-composting buildings. Just add water. It is impossible for you to avoid a mold problem if your building gets wet or damp and stays wet or damp for more than a few days, and that's how long it takes. It is a very short timeline. Stuff gets wet, and within 24 hours, the biological mechanisms within the spores start to wake up. 48 hours, you start to get metabolism. 72 hours, you're done. And then it's just a matter of geometric multiplication and geometric expansion. And one spore becomes 1,000, becomes a million, becomes a billion, and
Mhm.
so on and so forth. And so the only thing you can really do, since we have all the conditions that mold loves around us, the only variable that we can control is moisture. And so people come to us and they say, I got mold in my body, and I got mycotoxins, and I want you to find the mold in my house that's making me sick. Like pin the
Yes.
tail on the donkey, and I want to know. And I'm like, well, if somebody broke into your house, and do you really care what their name is or what their social security number is, or like it doesn't matter, right? It really truly doesn't matter. The name doesn't matter, because what matters is, in this particular case, that's not even the problem. The problem is you left the door wide open. Like it's not like somebody had to break in. In many cases, we allow a moisture problem to occur in our home. We don't respond to it quickly, and we set the stage for this to happen, or at least we don't know well enough to do the things that we need to do quickly enough.
Or
Um,
landlords are
or
leaving.
landlords, yeah,
Yes.
and so that's a whole different conversation. That's actually, you can go to gotmoldsummit.com if you want to talk about landlords, and
For the summit
watch.
that you
Go,
have,
yeah,
I
so we
was
have
going to ask about that because that is such a comprehensive summit. And I was like, who are your top people there? I cannot believe the amount of work you put into that summit.
Oh, it's huge, and it was, and they're all awesome, and they're mostly researchers with nothing to sell. So it's no pitches, no bullshit. Everybody's awesome, and you will hear commonalities amongst them that contradict what's going on out there in the general public, right? So you will
Okay.
hear, if you listen to all of them, they all say the same thing in their own unique way, coming from their perspective. But the common elements you'll hear is that there's nothing to be afraid of. What we need to do
Mhm.
is learn how to make better decisions. In other words, don't be fearful, be discerning about this subject matter. The mold problem is a moisture problem, first, foremost, always and forever. You can't have it without it. It does not exist in the absence of a dampness or uncontrolled moisture. Mold doesn't grow. And so that means you don't need chemicals, zappers, cleaners, ozone, all that's hydroxyls. All this is nonsense. It is all, there's a billions of dollars wasted on gadgets and sprays, potions, pills, powders, and whatever. Uh, and that includes on the detox protocols. I hate to say it, but there's a ton of money wasted, all driven by uh, BS tests and fear. And it's a shame, because all that money could be invested in building better buildings. It could at least be invested in remediation, um,
Okay.
and or relocation. Like
Yeah.
sometimes it's best to just cut bait. So it just depends on the situation. But the mycotoxin urine panels, this is just, I'll beat a couple of drums here really quickly. So mycotoxin urine panels are the most commonly abused test right now. All the functional docs are using them. Everyone who calls themselves mold literate, but actually really don't know anything, use those. Dr. Mark Philaday, who you should watch on our
Right.
summit,
Yes.
he eviscerates it. He was the guy who convinced Great Plains Labs to create the mycotoxin urine panels, and then now says, because of his experience, which you can watch on that video, he now says, uh, stop using that stuff. All you're doing is feeding a beast, and basically what you're getting there is food-based exposures. So what you have is, and if you want to talk about mold exposure, our modern food supply is contaminated
Yep.
uh, across the board. unless you're eating local, seasonal, and in fact unprocessed grains and things like that. You're eating mycotoxins, guaranteed.
Yep.
In fact, there was a really fascinating story just now, just a couple of weeks ago, maybe a week ago, um, about a mycotoxin called zearalenone, and it's
Yeah.
highly regulated in Europe, and there's a chemical analog of it that is also banned in Europe. We have no regulation for it whatsoever. We
Right.
know it's highly estrogenic. It's carcin obviously because of that it's potentially mutagenic and carcinogenic and all that stuff. So it becomes a mycoestrogen in metabolism. And so, bottom line is that they found mycoestrogens related to zearalenone and its chemical analog in 84% of women's placentas out of 320 or something like that. And it was a big diverse group. And it found it in 94% of their urine. Um, so, these are women that are probably being pretty careful about what they're eating, you
Hello,
know?
that's me. That was on my urine test.
Yeah.
Zero showed up. So tell me, this is in,
It is not in your air.
it's not in our air, it's in the food.
It's all in your food.
And it could be my dates that I'm eating, the dried fruit, the
That's
wheat. I'm
probably from
allowed to
conventional
eat
meat and dairy.
conventional meats and dairy. And what's funny is the conventional, I have a meat subscription for pasture raised meat. And so it's like when I go out to eat on
That's
the,
it. It's restaurants. So what's killing us in the United States is convenience and
yep,
comfort.
yep,
Both the fact that we don't have to leave the house, we don't have to leave the house to get our food. Like I mean, we don't have to hunt. We don't do any of that stuff. Refrigerators and air conditioning, I think, or I would say climate control, are probably the beginning of the decline in human vitality. We got fat and lazy and weak because we can adjust it because we can load the fridge and we
yep.
can turn on the AC and we can go sit down in front of the TV. The TV is probably the nail in the coffin, but I think it's convenience and comfort. Not to say I'm wishing that stuff away. I like my fridge, I like my AC, and I really like my heat. I live in Minnesota and it's bloody cold here, but it is those things that and then profit, which means that we build buildings like crap. Um, we build for speed and profit instead of for to be the protective shell that it is. And more important than a protective shell, I see the building as an extension of your immune system. It's an
I love this
exoskin.
part you said
Yeah, it's
last
an
week.
exoskeleton. It is, a building is a lot like a body, in the sense that it's got organ systems, or a building. Think about it as a system of life-sustaining systems. So that you could define an organism in that way. It doesn't have to be animate. It doesn't have to have a soul, but it does have a birthday. Every building has a birthday,
Mhm.
and every building potentially has a death day. So that you could say that it has a lifespan, right? And so,
Really?
and the longevity of the building is largely directly correlated, in fact, in most cases, to how well it's cared for. And so, when buildings start to decay or when they have a problem, in fact, they begin just like when we're born. The day we're born, we begin to die. I mean, you say we grow, but we're actually on an arc towards our inevitable death. Buildings are the same way, and they
Yeah.
begin to deteriorate with the elements and with expansion and contraction, and then planned obsolescence with a lot of materials that are built into it. And
Really?
so buildings begin to decay, or at least become susceptible to moisture intrusion, essentially the moment that last nail goes into the trim, before the contractor walks off the project for the last time. And so that is the building. Then once it begins to fail, it fails in really essentially one of two ways. It begins to fail to shed wind and water. If a building begins to fail shedding wind and water, which is how all buildings begin to fail, then water gets into the building in ways that is not planned. And when it gets into places that, like, we build buildings with wall cavities, which is so dumb, we fill
Right.
it full of fluffy insulation, which holds the water like a sponge, and then we put mold food over top of it just to make sure there's plenty to eat.
Right.
And then we take just just for to put a cherry on top, we then take carcinogenic petrochemicals and then paint all the surfaces and put on finishes. And then we close up the windows and doors and caulk everything up to save energy. And then we never leave the house. And then we're like, oh, why is there skyrocketing rates of asthma, allergies, autoimmune disease, cancers, autism? What the hell's going on? Big pharma?
Yeah, right.
More like chemical companies making our building materials and really stupid policies around energy usage over health. Um, you know, so
What a
but
cool
it's
thing.
coming to a head. People are waking up. I mean, people talk about make America healthy again. You can talk about food all day long, but you cannot nourish your way or fast your way or out of an indoor air quality problem. If you have a bad indoor environment and you're breathing 20,000 times a day, which is what the 13 to 15 times a minute comes out to 20,000 times a day, that is 2,000 gallons, enough to fill a swimming pool, which is also 30 pounds of air if you can get your mind around that.
Oh, that,
And so
that
that's
is
every single day, right? It's mind blowing. And if you realize that you only eat maximum about 4 pounds of food a day if you eat 3 meals, and most people who listen to this probably aren't. And if you drink all 8 glasses of water, they recommend that's 4 pounds of water. So that's 8 pounds in total, food and water combined. And I'm telling you that you breathe 30 pounds of air, right? So, but yet it's the thing you think about last, right? You don't
true.
think about, right? So it's an afterthought, but yet it is your single largest environmental exposure by orders of magnitude. And so it's a big deal. It's a big deal. It's like hiding in plain sight right under the tip of your nose. Literally, right? Um, it's so obvious that you can't see it, and because it's so close to us, and like humans love we love to take the people and things closest to us for granted. And so, what's closer to you than air? Nothing, right? And so therefore it is in fact the ultimate afterthought. And so so my job is
Thank
to
you.
bring awareness to this nebulous concept, which people think of as nothingness, but I'm here to tell you it's filled with stuff.
Mm,
And so you want to know what's in your food, you should know what's in your air.
mm,
If you're concerned
cool.
about nutrition, if you flip the back of if you go to the grocery store and you
We
take
all
anything off
do.
the shelf and look at the back of it, and you're not asking questions about your air, then you are missing out on the largest impact activity that you could possibly have. And it really is. It is your the relationship you have with your home in particular, because we spend so much time here now. Many of us work from home. I mean, my
Look at
commute
both of
is
us.
I'm still wearing my sweatpants. So I mean, you're not supposed to show. I think it's faux pas to like show below the waist in Zoom days, but
You're forgiven.
um, yeah, but my commute is so short that I have to be really careful about how I treat this building, because it is it is like the Russian stacking dolls, the Matryoshka dolls. Your microbiome in you, we all know that that's important,
Oh yeah.
and we all know it's important on you, right? I mean, with this incredible microbial sheath that's around us, doing wonderful things to protect you. Well, the same thing's going on around you, and so you want to make sure that you have a healthy microbiome, not a sanitized one,
Hmm.
not a sterile one. You don't want a sterile gut. You don't want sterile skin. You don't want sterile anything, right? We are microbial. So this whole engagement with your building is your single most important relationship that you have in terms of health and longevity. And so my sort of call to arms is, get familiar with your home, make friends with it, recognize that it can't live without you very well, right? You ever see an unoccupied house? It doesn't do very well.
Nope.
But homes that are lovingly cared for do this really weird thing. They take care of the people within it. There's this symbiotic relationship. You can actually have it was a really interesting idea for me to have a symbiotic relationship with an inanimate organism. You know, um, and we seem to like to name boats, men particularly like to name boats. In the UK, they name houses. Maybe we should start naming our houses here.
Got my
Um,
car that's named.
right. Well, see, some people
Pink.
like their Herbie the Love Bug, right? I mean, we've got movies made about cars with names, but there aren't many. I mean, the houses of Green Gables now, and they're just we don't anthropomorphize our homes maybe the way we should,
Mhm.
because it would maybe give some life to this thing that gives us. We're like hermit crabs, in the sense that we don't do very well without our shell. We really do require this this some what building biologists call a third skin. You know, you got your skin, then you got the clothing, and then you got this third skin. And I like that idea. But I think it's more intimate in a strange way, you know, because there's this idea about the organ systems that I mentioned to you.
Yeah.
So you've got, you know, the HVAC system is the lungs, and the plumbing is the circulatory system, and the electrical system is the nervous system, and you can even look at the bones as the studs and the wooden members, and then the fat is the insulation. And if you look at the cross section of a wall assembly, you'll see that the sheet there's you've got the plywood or OSB, and then you've got some builder's wrap maybe, and then you got the siding, and that's just like skin, like dermis with the layers of skin. You know, I mean, it really the anatomy of the building is remarkably similar to. It's got a a waste pipe going out the back. You know,
Sure.
like you've got it's just got all sorts of very similar. Of course, exhaust pipes going out the top, and so we have these remarkable. We build these buildings with all similar systems, but there's this thing that's kind of like, where's the immune system? And I'm here to tell you that that's you. You are the immune system, and it's even more intricate. You're actually the mitochondria. You're the power plant. You are the organizer of these things.
Energy.
You're the one whose job is to make sure that the cellular membrane, which is what the mitochondria help do, is healthy. Or and that if you got to close it up if there's a problem, right? Moisture control. And if there's not a problem, you can open the windows and let air through, which is what the mitochondria essentially do. They're either letting stuff in and processing and communicating, or they close it down for cell danger response. And so we have the same. I mean, it's the same thing. We are the mitochondria within this cell that we call our home. And when we take good care of it, it really does. It provides a safe place for us to heal and to grow and to reproduce, to produce more mitochondria, right? Like baby, right? It really, the metaphor plays all the way through. Um, and so I encourage people to consider that metaphor, and then playing that metaphor through. There's also this idea about like, inspections. What's in a good inspection? Think about an inspection like a physical exam at a doctor, right? This is going to be there's going to be some questions. You're going to sit down, background history. Like, it's not just walking in, taking some samples, and walking out the door. That you don't walk into the doctor's office and pee in a cup. All right, see ya. Like, that's not the way it's supposed to be done, and that's not the way a proper assessment is done. You're going to use different tools to assess, and you're going to be taking a lot of visual data, and you're going to take, the doctor feels you, I mean, if that's legal anymore. And, and some doctors won't do it anymore for that reason. Um, so the idea is that you have that physical exam is an important thing to do in the process of making an assessment of something so important like your health or the status of a building. And think about remediation like surgery, because it is. And you don't just jump into surgery from the results from an at-home cholesterol test, for example. You wouldn't suddenly go, "Oh my God, my cholesterol is high. I need a stent." And that's what a lot of people do with a petri dish. And
Right.
they're like, "I need remediation. I'm going to call the guy down the street who's going to come give me a free inspection," which, by the way, is a sales call,
Yeah.
and he's going to give you a bill for $10,000 whether you need it or not. And so, what we need to do is kind of pump the brakes on this stuff. This may be urgent, but it does not need to be an emergency, such that you
Mhm.
you know throw caution to the wind. That's how people get taken advantage of in this
Yeah.
space.
No, that's
You
so
know.
great. So you're answering the question that's been spinning in my head. It's like, okay, I'm thinking of all the homes in Solana Beach where we live in San Diego, which are beach homes that are old, built in, my home we're 2 blocks from the beach, 1930s, you
Yep.
know,
Yeah,
and
you've been getting a lot of ocean air for a
oh
long time,
yeah.
and probably no air conditioning, right?
So we have some split units. They're new addition. However, yes, majority no air conditioning.
Yeah, and that's a problem because it's not for the cooling, and this is what people don't understand. It's for the dampness, and so like an air conditioner is a dehumidifier, and it is in fact called an air conditioner, not an air cooler, right?
Yeah.
So that conditioning has more than one meaning. It has, well, I
Cool.
should say it contains within it that we are conditioning the air. We're bringing it to a temperature that's comfortable, and we're also bringing it to a humidity that is comfortable.
Mm,
And because humidity drives comfort as much as it does, because damp spaces feel colder. And but also the HVAC industry has only recently started caring about mold, except for from a liability perspective, because they've really all of them, they've all been about comfort. And so
mhm,
um, so now they're starting to see that there's more, that this is really about longevity of the building as well, right?
mhm.
Keeping buildings that are left unconditioned fall apart, they die. And so you don't want to leave. I wrote an article called the vacation home syndrome, which is basically a wake up call for anybody who wants to leave a house unoccupied for a little while. I tell them leave the heat and air conditioning on as if people are living there. Otherwise, you will come back and you will have a $20,000 mold problem, and you will have saved yourself $400 in utilities. Congratulations. Or $5,000 in utilities. Who cares? But you're going to spend $20,000 to fix that problem. And it's just like every other vacation home you've ever walked into. You go, what the heck? And that was because
Oh
someone
my.
was penny wise and pound foolish. Happens all the time. So in San Diego, where you've got all that warm, all that cool, humid air,
Yep.
but by the way, is also loaded with nutrients, not really, but minerals that are facilitate life, but not necessarily fuel mold growth, but do stimulate life. All that comes in and just bathes the house with this essential a cool dampness, and so we see massive problems in those homes that have just decided they're going to be not operate as if they're dealing in a high humidity environment. I was in a $20 million house on the hill in Malibu like that, and I
Yeah.
and I it walked in. It was so musty. It was disgusting. I mean, it was, and the guy, it was really sick, and they did not have air conditioning in that building. And I was like, you built a $20 million house on the hill and you don't have AC. It's shocking to me. And that house all had to get gutted. It's like so. So this kind of thing is not unique. It's not, in other words, it affects the whole socioeconomic spectrum. It's
For
you know
sure. For
there's no one's exempt. It's an equal opportunity pollutant.
That's right.
You know.
So what's the thing that you want to leave my listeners with, Jason?
Well, there's a few things actually. So first of all, don't get taken by junk science stuff. So specifically the mycotoxin urine panels, which are basically telling you what you've eaten in the last few days.
Yes.
And yes, you can excrete, you can inhale mycotoxins, but you're not doing it in your house unless you have very high spore counts. And if you do have high spore counts, you would find that doing an air test using my kit, for example, or a professional. So if you don't have high spore counts, you're not breathing mycotoxins in your home. Okay, because they don't go airborne by themselves. They have to be on spores. If there's mold in a wall, you're not breathing mycotoxins. You may be breathing toxins produced by mold, but they are not mycotoxins, which is what these tests look for. Toxins produced by mold are voluminous. There are thousands and thousands of compounds produced by mold that are not classified as toxins, but that produce inflammatory responses that are often appear as toxic reactions. So, in other words, you can have an inflammatory response, and that looks a lot like a toxic response, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's toxic at the cellular level. So this is nuanced stuff. I'm not a doctor, never even played one on TV, but it is, like the point is that there's a lot of stuff that you think you land on something firm. Oh, I think I understand. Good luck.
Yeah.
Professionals and experts that I talk to all day long, like this, all are still feeling around in the dark, trying to make sense of this stuff. The science is emerging, and so what we do know is this: mycotoxin urine panels are junk science. We
Got
also
it.
know is petri dishes, junk science. They are
Okay.
always positive. Both those tests are always positive. So you would never plan your life around a clock that's broken because it's right twice a day. That doesn't mean it's a good and reliable way to tell time. And that's exactly what those tests are like. They're always high, and so people say, "Oh, I don't use the score. I just look at the molds." No, this is 21-year-old ERMI in particular, 21-year-old genomics. It's junk science. We're working on one. We'll knock that out of the box, but
Cool.
it's a major problem, and people are getting extracted. Also, avoid these really crazy inspection companies that are charging $8,000 to do an inspection, and then they pass along the report to their brother-in-law for $100,000 remediation quote. Those guys are scamming everybody. I hate to say it; they will remain nameless. But if you're listening and you recognize that pattern, you know who I'm talking about. It's a big problem, and people are getting hurt. And so, um, I would highly recommend that if you're being told that this is the only person that knows how to do this, mm,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's more than one person. I assure you. And it all comes down to following an industry standard, the IICRC S520, which is all in my ebook. And by the way, the ebook is a great starting point. The
Yep.
point of this is the whole thing is you have to focus on moisture. Don't focus on the mold or the species. Doesn't matter. That constantly changes. What you focus on is the moisture problem and then clean up the mess. So focus on the moisture problem, fix that first, no matter what, and then clean up the mess. And that's what remediation really is. It's not about killing it. It's not about zapping it. There's none of that stuff. You don't need any of these things. Killing mold is just adding a step and an expense, and oftentimes a chemical that you can't get out of the house. And so really the point is to stop the moisture, remove the materials that are supporting fungal growth, clean everything, and then once everything has been verified microscopically, then you can begin to rebuild. And that's how simple it is. It really is that simple. It's just that it's a lot of work, and contractors don't want to do the work, but they still want to get paid the big bucks. So they use fancy stuff and fancy words and chemicals and zappers and all that stuff, and then they still hit you with the big bill, but they don't have to do half the work. That's it's a shortcut. So here's my upshot though, and this is the good news.
You like that.
Mold is, it's a major problem. So 47% of American homes have a mold or moisture problem of significance,
Mhm.
and 35% of the US population is suffering from some sort of systemic inflammation. I don't know what the overlap is. I don't know if what the causal relationship is here, but I can assure you that mold isn't helping. And so who knows how much of that is directly related, the inflammatory disease is directly related to mold, but if 47% of homes have a mold or moisture problem of significance, I would imagine there's a strong relationship. So what we wanted to start thinking about is if you don't have a known problem, but you have some sort of any symptom at all, you might want to look at this. And if you do have a symptom and you're not looking at this, well, then maybe this needs to be the next thing you do look at. And you can't just trust a test, my test or any test. You have to engage your senses. You have to look at this as a clinical diagnosis. Do you have symptoms and signs? In other words, you see conditions in the building. Are you aware of a history in the building with mold and moisture issues?
Mhm.
Is there condensation, water bugs? You have to tune into this. You have to get familiar with your building. Read the ebook, and then if you do see something, smell something, or feel something, then do something, and that means find the source of the moisture. And finding the source of the moisture is sometimes beyond people's capacities. So again,
Right.
the ebook helps people do that, but that's when you usually want to engage a professional because a mold inspection should actually be a moisture inspection. Yeah, so we call it a mold inspection because it's the four-letter word that makes people call us, but it's really a moisture inspection. And so finding the source of the moisture is the prime directive, and then from there you actually can get to the extent of the mold because mold doesn't grow in the air, it grows on the surface, and it starts where the moisture is. So it's like not that complex. It's just that it's become hijacked by people who say, "Oh, it's too complex for you to know. You just need to
Right.
trust me." And this it reminds me of like the high priest. I'm going to interpret God for you. You don't know anything. You just go give me money and I'll
Yep.
interpret it for you. And it's gives me the same heebie-jeebies. So
Bring it back to the people.
yeah, bring it. Yeah, exactly. No, this is a self-empowerment thing. I think if you live on planet Earth,
Mhm.
which is a water planet that's, but planet fungi, I might add,
Yes, you said that right.
um, you need to learn this. You know how to tie your shoes, you know how to change a tire, maybe, I hope. Um, this is table stakes. It is fundamental to learning how to live in buildings and breathe air.
Right.
And so here's the upshot, and this is the upshot. Um, Unlike almost every other thing in your life, um, and this is the sad reality, we are out of control. We truly have no control. We're out of control in many cases, but we're truly not in control of anything. Very few things. We're in control of our attitude, most more than anything else, how we respond to things. Um, but the general external world is not in our control, no matter how little we like to admit that. So, and there are so many things we can't avoid. We can't avoid, the toxins that are in the food in the restaurants we go to. We can't avoid the air that's in our cars, and in the streets. I mean, you go outside, who knows you're breathing something that was spewed out of a smokestack in India not long ago. There's a great book, by the way, called Caesar's Last Breath, and he talks about how there are molecules floating around that we've all breathed molecules that came out of Caesar's last breath. And so, in essence, it's we are sharing all this stuff. So we can't control that. Um, you in many cases really can't control the water you drink because I mean, who's carrying around gallon jugs with them? So my point is that we don't have a lot of control over these things. But the indoor environment is an area where you have an enormous potential for control, right?
Mhm.
And so you start looking at like this humongous outsized uh, um, impact, this environmental exposure that we have that's so large
Yeah.
that we take for granted. And then you look at it and you go, holy shit, there's also this huge opportunity for control.
Mm.
This is the leverage point
Yeah.
or the fulcrum for massive change
Cool.
in our health as a nation. If you want to make America healthy again, yes, let's get our food straight. We have to eat 3 times a day, but you have to breathe 20,000 times a day. So
Yeah.
we got to get our buildings straight. If we get our buildings straight, then when we eat well, we can heal as well. But if you can't get your building straight, it doesn't matter how well you're eating. It doesn't matter how much you're working out. In fact, you're probably working out in the moldy basement. So this what we have to do is start to recognize the areas of control we do have and then take control and execute on that, which means again, if you see something, smell something, feel something, you should run HEPA filters 24/7 with a lot of carbon in them that'll help remove VOCs, the man-made ones as well as the microbial ones. You get HEPA vacuums. Don't use chemicals. Eliminate all fragrances from your life, all chemicals that you can. I mean, I am no surface cleaning even. I mean, like force of nature is what we use. Like it's a hydrochlorous acid, and it's awesome.
Yep.
It's fun to make too.
HCl.
Yep, it's great stuff. And so,
Hypochlorous acid. Yeah.
yeah, hydrochlorous acid, a hypochlorous acid, right?
Yeah.
Um, and but then open the windows. So the big mistake here is that we have separated ourselves from nature. The word human comes from humus, which is soil. And
Mhm.
we are of the earth. We are earthlings, right? And so we are of the earth, and we will be returned to it. And we have separated ourselves from it wholesale. We put rubber on the bottom of our shoes, and we block our eyes from the source of all life, and layers of it in many cases. It's insane. And 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 then we wonder why we're having all of these problems. So, my suggestion is to get your house clean and dry, eliminate the chemicals, maintain it lovingly, take care of your home, it will take care of you, and then get outside, you know, and get the morning light and walk barefoot. And there's 22 peer-reviewed studies on grounding it's proven to reduce inflammation in magical ways. So, go smell the flowers. Go expose yourself to nature because the spores in outdoor air are hormetic. They will train your body to better deal with the imbalances that may come up in your buildings because you're going to deal with a mold problem if you aren't already. It's up there with death and taxes. So my suggestion is be prepared. You know, um, plan for the best, but expect the best, but plan for the worst. And that means knowing that when something gets wet, you gotta deal with it quickly, because the longer it stays wet, the longer it grows, the more you're exposed to it, the bigger it gets, and the more expensive it is to remove. So there's no equity in delaying. This is one of those things that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, but a quick response is almost just as good.
Jason Earle, heard is all I have to say. The philosopher, Jason Earle, we got to record today. I'm so excited. That was so
All
good.
right, my work here is done.
It's seriously done. And go hang out with your kiddos. And I want to say thank you for
My
everything.
pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure. Bye, Jason.